The people with two sets of DNA. Some people are literally their own twin, and they often don't even know it. Right now, you might be walking around with two completely different sets of DNA in your body, and the only way you'd find out is through a very specific medical test. There are people living normal lives who are genetic impossibilities. They take a DNA test and get results that make no scientific sense. A mother gets told her children aren't biologically hers, even though she gave birth to them. A man finds out he's the uncle of his own children, not the father. These stories sound impossible, but they're real, and they happen because these people are chimeras. Humans with two sets of DNA living in one body. Today I'm going to show you how this happens, the crazy ways people discover their chimeras, and why you might actually be one too without knowing it. Here's something that will completely change how you think about your own body. You probably believe that every cell in your body contains the same DNA. That's what we're taught in school. You inherit half your DNA from your mom, half from your dad, and every single cell in your body, from your brain to your toes, has that exact same genetic code. But for some people, that's completely wrong. Some people have different DNA in different parts of their body. One arm might have completely different genetics than the other arm. Their blood might have different DNA than their skin. Half their face might be genetically different from the other half. This creates some absolutely wild problems. Imagine being a mother who gave birth to your children, raised them, and then a DNA test tells you they're not yours. Not because of a mix-up at the hospital, but because the DNA in your blood is different from the DNA in your ovaries. So the test is technically correct. Your blood DNA doesn't match your kids, but you're still their biological mother. Or imagine needing an organ transplant and finding out your brother is a perfect match, but then discovering he's not actually your brother because you absorbed your twin in the womb, and that twin's DNA created the organ that needs replacing. So you're both siblings and not siblings at the same time. These scenarios sound like science fiction, but they're real cases that have happened to real people. And the disturbing part is that most chimeras never find out. They live their entire lives not knowing they're carrying someone else's DNA because there's no reason to test for it. The problem is that our entire system, medical testing, paternity tests, criminal DNA evidence, all of it, is built on the assumption that each person has one set of DNA. When that assumption is wrong, the whole system breaks down in confusing and sometimes devastating ways. And here's what makes this even more mind-blowing. Scientists are discovering that having cells with different DNA is way more common than anyone thought. You might be sitting there thinking, well, this is interesting, but it doesn't apply to me. But there's a very real chance you have foreign DNA in your body right now, and you just don't know it because you've never been tested in the right way. Let me break down exactly what a chimera is, how it happens, and why it's one of the strangest things that can occur in human biology. What is a chimera? When two become one. In Greek mythology, a chimera was a monster made from parts of different animals: lion head, goat body, snake tail. In biology, a chimera is an organism that contains cells from two different individuals. And yes, this can happen to humans. The most dramatic form of human chimerism happens when two embryos fuse together in the womb. Here's how that works. Sometimes a woman releases two eggs during ovulation, and both eggs get fertilized by different sperm. This would normally result in fraternal twins, two separate babies developing in the womb at the same time. But very early in development, before these embryos have formed into anything recognizable, they can sometimes fuse together into a single embryo. Think about that. Two separate embryos, each with their own unique DNA, merge into one. And that single fused embryo develops into one baby instead of two. But that baby carries the DNA from both original embryos. They're literally two people in one body. This doesn't mean the person looks like a monster or has two heads or anything like that. In most cases, chimeras look completely normal. They might have slightly different colored eyes, or a stripe of different skin tone running down their body, or patches of different hair color. But these features are subtle enough that most people just think they have interesting coloring, not that they're carrying their twins. The DNA distribution can be random. Maybe the left side of your body developed from embryo A and the right side from embryo B. Maybe your organs are a mix. Maybe your blood came from one embryo but your skin from another. There's no predictable pattern. It depends on how the embryos fused and how the cells divided as the fetus grew. Now, you might be wondering, if this happens early enough, why doesn't the body reject the foreign DNA? Good question. It's because the fusion happens so early in development, before the immune system forms. The body grows up thinking both sets of DNA are normal and belong there. It's like if two families moved into a house together when the kids were newborns. Those kids would grow up thinking it's completely normal to have two families in one house because they never knew anything different. But here's where it gets even weirder. That absorbed twin isn't necessarily distributed evenly throughout the body. Sometimes the twin's DNA is only in specific organs or tissue types. You could have your twin's DNA in your blood, but nowhere else. Or in your reproductive organs, but not your blood. Or in patches of skin, but not in your internal organs. This means you could take a DNA test using blood and get one result, then take a DNA test using a cheek swab and get a completely different result. Both tests would be accurate. You just have two different sets of DNA depending on where you test. There's also something called tetragametic chimerism, which is an even stranger version. This happens when two separately fertilized eggs fuse, but in a way where both sets of reproductive cells remain. So a person could potentially have children that are genetically their siblings' children, not their own, because the eggs or sperm came from the absorbed twins' DNA. Scientists think this type of chimerism is incredibly rare, but here's the thing, they don't actually know how rare it is, because unless something goes wrong or someone gets very specific genetic testing, there's no way to know if someone is a chimera. You could be one right now and have zero idea. How they're discovered. Real stories that sound impossible. Let me tell you some real stories of how people discovered they were chimeras, because these cases are absolutely wild and they show just how much chaos this can cause. Case 1, Lydia Fairchild. In 2002, Lydia was a pregnant mother of two who applied for welfare assistance in Washington state. As part of the application process, she had to take a DNA test to prove the children were hers. The test came back saying she was not the mother of her children. Lydia was obviously confused. She had given birth to these kids. There were hospital records, witnesses, everything. But the DNA test was clear. Her blood DNA did not match her children's DNA in a way that indicated she was their mother. The state accused her of welfare fraud. They thought she was trying to collect benefits for someone else's children. Lydia insisted she was the mother, but the DNA evidence seemed irrefutable. Things got so serious that when she gave birth to her third child, a court officer was present in the delivery room to witness the birth and immediately take DNA samples. That third child's DNA also didn't match Lydia's blood DNA. She had literally just given birth, and the DNA test still said she wasn't the mother. Finally, a lawyer found a similar case and suggested testing different parts of Lydia's body. They tested her cervical tissue, and those cells had completely different DNA that did match her children. Lydia was a chimera. Her blood had one set of DNA, but her reproductive organs had her absorbed twins' DNA. So her children were genetically her twins' children, but she had still given birth to them. Case 2, Karen Keegan. Karen needed a kidney transplant, so her 3 adult sons were tested to see if any of them were a match. The test revealed that 2 of her sons were not genetically related to her at all. Just like Lydia, Karen had given birth to these children and raised them, but DNA testing said they weren't hers. Further testing revealed that Karen was a chimera. Most of her body had one set of DNA, but some of her cells, including the cells that produced her eggs, had different DNA. 2 of her sons came from eggs with the chimeric DNA, which is why they didn't appear to be related to her blood DNA. Case 3. A man I'll call John, because his case was part of a court proceeding. John and his wife were having trouble conceiving, so they went through fertility testing. The doctors discovered something bizarre. John's sperm had different DNA than his blood. It turned out John was a chimera, and his reproductive organs had developed from his absorbed twin cells. Genetically, his sperm came from his twin. So any children he fathered would technically be his twin's children, not his, at least according to DNA testing. He would be the biological uncle, not the biological father. These cases are terrifying because they show how our entire system of proving parentage can fall apart when someone is a chimera. DNA testing is supposed to be the gold standard, the irrefutable proof. But with chimeras, DNA testing can give you completely wrong answers depending on which part of the body you test. Think about the implications. Criminal cases rely on DNA evidence. Paternity cases rely on DNA testing. Immigration cases sometimes require DNA proof of family relationships. All of these systems assume one person equals one set of DNA. When that's not true, innocent people could be accused of crimes they didn't commit, or denied benefits they deserve, or separated from family members, all because a test showed the wrong DNA. And here's the really disturbing part. In all of these cases, the people had no idea they were chimeras until something went wrong. Lydia lived her whole life not knowing she carried two sets of DNA. Karen didn't know until she needed a transplant. These discoveries only happen by accident when someone gets very specific genetic testing that happens to test different tissue types. How many chimeras are out there who never had a reason to get tested? How many people are walking around with two sets of DNA and will never know because nothing in their life requires them to take a DNA test that would reveal it? Are you a chimera? It's more common than you think. Now here's where this gets personal. You're probably thinking, okay, this is fascinating, but I'm definitely not a chimera. What are the odds? But the truth is, you might be wrong. There are different types of chimerism, and some of them are surprisingly common. The dramatic cases I just described, full fusion of two embryos, those are rare. But there's another type called microchimerism, and it's way more common than anyone expected. Microchimerism is when you have a small number of cells in your body with different DNA, rather than large portions of your body being made of different DNA. And it turns out this happens to almost everyone through pregnancy. When a woman is pregnant, cells from the fetus cross the placenta and enter her bloodstream. These fetal cells can survive in the mother's body for decades after the pregnancy ends. Scientists have found fetal cells in mothers' bodies 30, 40, even 50 years after giving birth. So if your mom was pregnant with you, she's carrying some of your cells with your DNA in her body right now. And if she was pregnant with your siblings, she's carrying their cells too. She's a microchimera, one person with cells from multiple other people. But it goes the other way too. During pregnancy, some of the mother's cells can cross the placenta and enter the fetus. So you might be carrying cells with your mother's DNA in your body. You're not just made from your mom's DNA, you might literally have some of her cells living inside you. And if you're a twin, or if your mother was pregnant with another child before or after you might have cells from your siblings too. Older sibling cells can persist in the mother and then transfer to younger siblings during later pregnancies. Scientists tested a bunch of people and found that about 60 to 70% of people who have siblings or whose mothers had multiple pregnancies show evidence of microchimerism. That's more than half of all people walking around with foreign DNA in their bodies. These aren't huge amounts of cells. We're talking maybe one foreign cell per million of your own cells, or sometimes even less. But they're there, and they're functional. They can divide and persist for your entire life. And here's the really weird part. Scientists don't fully understand what these foreign cells are doing. Are they just sitting there doing nothing? Are they helping with immune function? Are they causing problems? There's evidence that fetal microchimerism might help mothers heal from injuries or fight off diseases. Some studies have found fetal cells concentrated in areas where the mother had tissue damage, like they migrated there to help with repairs. Other studies have linked microchimerism to autoimmune diseases, suggesting the foreign cells might trigger immune problems. Nobody knows for sure yet. But what is clear is that the idea of one person having one set of DNA is way more complicated than we thought. There's also something called twin chimerism from blood transfusions or organ transplants. If you've ever received donated blood, some of those donor cells might still be in your body years later, especially if the transfusion happened when you were young. If you have a transplanted organ, you definitely have foreign DNA in your body. That's kind of the point of a transplant. So the question isn't really, are you a chimera, but rather what type of chimera are you and how much foreign DNA are you carrying? For most people, it's microchimerism from pregnancy, either from being pregnant, from your mother being pregnant with you or your siblings, or possibly from transfusions. These tiny amounts of foreign DNA probably don't affect you in any noticeable way, but for a small number of people, they're full chimeras with significant amounts of DNA from an absorbed twin. These people usually don't know it until something forces them to get tested in a way that reveals it. The reason this matters is that it completely changes how we think about identity and genetics. We like to think of ourselves as individuals with our own unique DNA, but the reality is that many of us are mixtures, carrying genetic material from mothers, siblings, donors, or absorbed twins. In a weird way, we're all a little bit connected to other people on a cellular level. If you have your mom's cells in your body and she has your sibling's cells, then you're literally carrying a tiny piece of your sibling inside you too. We're not as separate and individual as we think we are. Here's what changed my entire perspective on this topic, and I think it'll change yours too. We spend so much time thinking about genetic identity, who we're related to, what we inherited from our parents, what makes us unique. We do ancestry DNA tests to find out where we came from. We argue about nature versus nurture. But chimerism shows us that the whole concept of genetic identity is way more fluid than we realize. You might be two people. You might be carrying pieces of your mother or siblings or an absorbed twin. Your children might be genetically your siblings' children. The person you think you are, genetically speaking, might not be accurate. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful in a weird way. The fact that mothers carry cells from all their children means every mother is literally made up of parts of her kids. The fact that twins confuse means some people are carrying on their twins' legacy by giving them a life they wouldn't have had otherwise. It also means we need to rethink how we use DNA evidence. Courts, hospitals, immigration services, all these systems need to understand that DNA testing isn't always straightforward. A mismatch doesn't automatically mean fraud or lying. Sometimes it means someone is a chimera and nobody realized it. The scientific community is starting to recognize this. Some genetic testing companies now test multiple tissue types if they get unexpected results. Some courts are aware of chimerism and will order additional testing if a DNA case doesn't make sense. But we're still in the early stages of understanding how common this is and what it means. Every few years, scientists discover new cases and realize chimerism is more prevalent than they previously thought. The human body is weird and complicated and full of surprises. And chimerism might be one of the weirdest, most surprising things about how we develop and who we are. Let me summarize what we've covered about people with two sets of DNA, because this is information that might literally change how you see yourself. Chimerism is when one person has cells with different DNA in their body. The most dramatic version happens when two embryos fuse in the womb, creating one person with DNA from both original embryos. These people are literally their own twin, carrying genetic material that would have been a separate person. Chimeras are usually discovered by accident when DNA testing gives impossible results. Mothers test as not being related to children they gave birth to. People find out their reproductive organs have different DNA than their blood. These discoveries only happen when something goes wrong that requires testing different tissue types. But microchimerism, having small amounts of foreign DNA, is extremely common. If you were born from a mother who had other pregnancies, you probably have some foreign cells in your body. If you've been pregnant, you're definitely carrying fetal cells from your children. If you've had a blood transfusion or organ transplant, you have donor DNA. The big takeaway is that one person, one DNA is not always true. We're mixtures, combinations, collections of genetic material from different sources, and for most people, this is completely invisible and has no impact on daily life. But for a small number of people, being a chimera creates serious complications with medical testing, paternity determination, and legal identity. This is why genetics is so much more complicated than what we learned in high school biology. The textbook version says you inherit half your DNA from each parent, and that's it. But the reality includes absorbed twins, fetal cells crossing the placenta, cells from siblings mixing during pregnancy, and all kinds of other ways that genetic material can end up in places it's not supposed to be. Understanding chimerism also changes how we think about identity and individuality. If you're carrying cells from your mother or siblings or an absorbed twin, are you completely separate from them? Or are you all part of each other in some small way? Scientists are still figuring out what all of this means. They're still discovering new cases and learning about how common different types of chimerism really are. They're still trying to understand what those foreign cells do in the body and whether they help or hurt. What we do know is that the human body is far stranger and more complex than most people realize. And the next time you see a DNA test result, remember that it's only showing you the DNA from whatever tissue was tested. There might be completely different DNA in other parts of that person's body, and nobody would know unless they specifically looked for it. You might be a chimera right now and not know it. And honestly, the only way to find out would be to get very expensive genetic testing on multiple tissue types, which insurance wouldn't cover unless you had a medical reason. So for most people, if they are chimeras, they'll just never know. And maybe that's okay. Maybe carrying a little bit of someone else's DNA is just part of being human. Maybe we're all connected in ways we can't see, and chimerism is just one example of that connection made visible through science. Subscribe if you want more mind-blowing science facts that'll change how you see everything.